Hello. Now that you guys have heard from some of the people for City of Charlotte, we're going to try and put you guys to work to help us design a place just outside this building. It's called Second Ward. So to do that, we have some facilitators, Dan Gallagher and myself from Charlotte DOT, and Dan Thilo, Jaya, and Michelle from the Charlotte Planning Department. And we're going to go through a design exercise. As you can see, we have 5 tables with base maps, and it's going to be, we'll have moderators working you through how to plan out a street network and then to work on land use and other transportation features. So with that, I'm going to let Dan Thilo give you a little bit of a background on Second Ward and some of the public involvement that will hopefully set you off in the right direction.
Thank you, Ben. A number of years ago, we did a master plan for Second Ward, and what we'd like to do today is to let y'all have a raw shot at it, and then what we're going to do at the end of it is bring in the consultant that did our plan for us so you can kind of compare with what you came up with, what was actually planned for the area. To start this off, I'm going to go over here and point to this map, and hopefully you can hear me without this mic. The area within the freeway loop is called Uptown. The area with the adjacent neighborhoods is what we call Center City. Within the Uptown area, it's divided into 4 historic wards. We've got First Ward, the historic Fourth Ward, which is, if you get out there and walk around, you'll see a lot of houses that were brought in. It looks like they've been there forever, but they were actually brought in the 70s. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then we have the Third Ward, which is out in this area. The Central Business District, which is Tryon Street, our main drag through the downtown area, goes right through here. And then we have Trade Street going north-south this way. And this is our historical crossroads of the Center City and for all of Charlotte. It's an old Indian trading path, and that is our ground zero spot for our Uptown area. The area that we're going to look at today is right in here. This is the Second Ward area. It's surrounded by a freeway loop here, which when I get into some of the other slides, you'll see that within the last couple of years, we have a new NASCAR Hall of Fame. As a result of that Hall of Fame, we were able to reclaim some land in this area with the reconfigured freeway loop, and that's going to be new development sites, as is one down here. We have a couple of neighborhoods, Dilworth in this area, South End over in here, which is kind of an old factory area. It's kind of an eclectic commercial, residential area today with the light rail going through it. In this area over here, we've got Midtown, which is connected with Stonewall Street going up through here. And there's like a shopping center in this area. And then the Elizabeth area, which again is a kind of a historic district over here. Elizabeth is a residential neighborhood. We are in this building right here. Okay. The building that we're in right now used to be called the Adams Mart. Now it's the Blake. When this plan was done, it was the Adams Mart. So that's where we're at right here. The area in blue is that land that I was telling you about that was reclaimed from the reconfiguration of the cloverleaf in here. Cameron Brown is an office building right next door. First Ward Park, and there's a building in there. It's a kind of an ugly looking 60s building. It's the old former Board of Education building. Metro School. There's a Hampton and a Hilton Gardens up here. This plan doesn't show it, but there's actually the NASCAR Hall of Famers right in here with our new convention center. First Baptist Church. There's a church up on Tryon Street that's, if you're up there, you'll see it's called Spirit Square. Back in the early 80s, that church was moved to this location. Or excuse me, in the 60s it was moved to this location, and that became a theater. And then we have the whole government center area right in here. So this is our second ward area that we'll be looking at. From 1980 to the 1950s, this neighborhood was called Brooklyn. And as this slide indicates, it was the heart of the African American community. It had churches, schools, residents. There were businesses in there. This is the former Second Ward High School, which was a black high school in the area. Remember that, because we're going to come back to that. As I mentioned earlier, 61 through 75, urban renewal begins. Urban renewal basically wiped out the whole entire area, cleaned the whole slate, created the government center area, which was, up on that side of the map. And all the residents were moved out, moved into public housing, and it just basically became very vacant. 75 through 2011, we saw a lot of development occur in the center city and the uptown especially. The other three wards really began to take off. New development occurred in those. First ward was completely redone. There was public housing that was put in there where some of the residents from the Brooklyn neighborhood were relocated to First Ward. They were relocated again. They put in a combination of market rate housing and public housing, and it's a real nice mix. Fourth Ward took off, as I mentioned earlier. A lot of the Victorian houses, like you see up in the upper left-hand corner, were moved into that area. The Gateway Center area, if you go up there now, there's Johnson and Wales. All of these areas really developed. Second Ward really kind of stagnated, and they did put a park in there called Marshall Park, and it's a good place to take photographs from. But as far as a park, it's pretty bleak. When we did our 2010 master plan in this historic Second Ward area, these were the guiding principles that we used. And they're the same guiding principles that we're going to have you take a look at today when you look at redeveloping or making recommendations on this area. Really, it's trying to create a new neighborhood that has mixed-use development, pedestrian-oriented, connections to all these various facilities. The moderators at your table will help you to better understand the connections to the surrounding areas. This is really a telling slide, and it's my last one that I wanted to share with you, is that this was the road system back in 1959. This was before that 277 Belk Freeway loop was put in. As you can see, it's a very fine crossroads of going north and south. It's a fine grain, and then when the urban renewal came in, and in '85 when they opened up the 277 loop, you can see that it really fragmented the outer center city from the uptown area, took out a lot of the streets, and kind of created its own little niche that's kind of separated from everything else. So with that, I think we're going to start our exercise. What we'd like to try and do is just do some bubble diagrams, showing some land use, some connectivity, where you think residential might go, where some mixed use might go, how you can create this neighborhood feeling and still connect to the Dilworth, Elizabeth area, Midtown.
We took the subterranean, the subterranean stream we left there, but we covered over the stormwater. We did something better with that and created a more 21st century water feature, kind of like the fountains in Atlanta.
Just come from the Greenway and make the connection up all the way to get you to the transit line, and then also we'll change this park around. We'll decrease the size of the park, but make it more usable.
I guess we'll start off with a greenway that we established along the highway to connect all the new stuff we want to build, as well as softening that side of the property. Doing some mixed use in the vicinity of the transit line, and also hotel space around here serving the convention center and the NASCAR Hall of Fame.
We wanted to put in some high rises and some mixed use to get the residential levels up to a higher level. And we also wanted to support the retail by putting in more people. So we're thinking that the bottom level would mainly be retail in a lot of these places.
We're bringing back Brooklyn Village, going to restore it, and I'll start on the northeast corner, and we're going to make a connection to the existing Greenway trail that comes down this way and run it to the park and around the park, and we will take it all the way down and make connections to these streets as well as to get them over to the NASCAR area.
Well, hello, everybody. Again, I'm Heath Kendrick with Land Design, landscape architect. We had the great fortune of, back in 2001, working on the Second Ward Master Plan with the City of Charlotte. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Master Plan. The cool thing is a lot of the things that y'all just talked about are in the plan. It's like you cheated somehow. And then I'm also going to show you the project that we worked on in 2006 that started to realize some of the things from the master plan. So again, a lot of the things that y'all touched on are wrapped up in this plan. So I think you've talked a little bit about the great urban framework that used to be in this side of Charlotte. Back in, you can see 1959, top left corner, very dense residential homes. This is a bird's eye perspective looking towards Center City across Brooklyn Village. Had a high school, movie theater, thriving African American community called Brooklyn. And of course, we know that in the 1960s and 1970s, urban renewal came along, took a lot of that framework away, and this is what we were left with. And hence, with all the vacant land that we had, land became cheap and easy, and that's why we have the government center and all the kind of the government facilities in this side of the uptown Charlotte area. So, working with the city, though, we sought to revitalize this part of uptown Charlotte. You can see the freeway for John Belk. You can see, let me see if this pointer, there we go. This is the existing convention center. Again, before NASCAR Hall of Fame, we were envisioning an expansion of the convention center. Metro School was going to be redone. This was the First Baptist Church. And you can see the urban framework that we were looking at bringing back in. This is Sackett Street, which is today Martin Luther King Boulevard, McDowell Street. This, what was used to be called the Adams Mark, today is the Blake. And then, of course, this is Stonewall. A lot of you mentioned lining the freeway with hotels, residential office space, and lo and behold, look what we did. We lined it. And again, part of that was to buffer the neighborhood, creating a sense of space it's just not there when you see these cars whizzing down the roads that are out there. A lot of that had to do with, we really started to look closely at the architecture. I know you folks are interested in the pedestrian and bicycle experience. We were introducing ground floor retail to a lot of these uses. How do you activate that street? Working with the planning department, thinking about massing of the building, the ground plane, 3 floors up, material changes, really activating that street and looking at a sense of scale. Because that's one thing that residential downtown lacks. You've got great residential in Fourth Ward, but it's townhomes, it's condos. What you don't have really uptown, other than some of your towers, is these brownstones, some sort of element that's kind of that mid-rise density. I like that a lot of you talked about extending out over 277, connecting to Little Sugar Creek, connecting to the Dilworth community across the bridge. This wasn't actually in the Second Ward Master Plan, but I wanted to include it. One of the thoughts that we had was this cat park idea. And of course, if you look at the plan, this is the existing convention center. This is 277, and then across the way, if you go out there and look, there's a building called the Summit Grandview. How could we cap the 277 and create, I think it ended up being about a 10-acre park. How do you cap that and really create some sort of true pedestrian link, more than just a bridge, create an experience so that if I'm a resident living in Dilworth or if I'm working uptown and going to work, it becomes something more than just a direct connection. It becomes a place. It becomes something special for Charlotte. We talked about Stonewall Street. We were calling Stonewall Street our Champs-Élysées. This was the place to be in Charlotte. If you look down at this rendering, and I know it's a little bit small, down at the rendering in the bottom right, you can see it became a true boulevard. Public art in the median, Bicycles, cars mix with on-street parking, or not on-street parking. We've got ground floor uses, really activating that street zone along through there and getting some of that density. Again, 277 is just to the bottom of that image on the top left, creating that sense of scale so that the community doesn't see that freeway experience. And then 3rd Street. We all know 3rd Street today is the existing Martin Luther King Jr. statue. And they have some great trees, and that's about it. You know, if you go out there today, there's just not a lot of people hanging out on 3rd Street. 3rd Street is what the Department of Transportation calls a workhorse street. Workhorse streets get you into town and get you out of town. That's all they're meant to do. And so what we started looking at is how can we recharacterize 3rd Street. So 3rd Street to the left of this perspective rendering here, this is all the government center buildings over behind these trees. These are the existing oaks that we'd like to save. Again, activating that street with some sort of setback of residential, again, brownstones, linear park, and then making that a true sense of place that it's lacking today. And then the real area that everyone started gravitating to, and everyone started mentioning in your plans, you've got either the existing Marshall Park stays or you did something to the park. But we all know that green space is vitally important to any sort of successful neighborhood. We started looking at what we called the Commons Park, completely doing away with Marshall Park. Marshall Park is just a goose poop place to be, right? You go out there and you walk around and it's just a bunch of feces. We started looking at Commons Park. And so what we started saying is, how can we gear this neighborhood, centralize it around some sort of great open space? More than just, hey, we put a bunch of grass down, if you build it, they'll come. Really activating that into a great urban experience that maybe Charlotte doesn't already have. So again, in plan view, looking at that, we've got 2nd Street bisecting the park, the historic gymnasium out of the 2nd Ward plan, talking with the alumni from the old 2nd Ward High School from Brooklyn, you know, preserving that and making it something special more than just an attachment to the metro school. How can we really celebrate that? So again, looking at architecture, dressing up that facade, and making that Charlotte's Bryant Park, a true urban park, so that someone wants to go outside and experience that place. So this is the 2nd Ward bird's eye perspective. This is what we saw 2nd Ward becoming. This is 2001. And we thought, you know, this thing is quickly going to change. From 2001, we were hoping by 2010, this would be our new urban fabric. Again, creating a smaller pedestrian scale, getting back to where it was before the urban renewal, and really creating something a bit more unique than what we had. Unfortunately, this thing called the recession happened. But before that, in 2006, we started a project called Brooklyn Village. It was Dan, if you want to share about the land swap, you can have at it. But the city and private development, they were looking at swapping land from 2nd Ward to 3rd Ward, and baseball was somehow tied in there, but this was part of it. And this was a chance for us to see something through from fruition from the 2nd Ward master plan, make it real. So from that, we had some elements the client wanted. You know, you all mentioned activating the green space. You can read up there, but really adding something so that it became a destination. If I lived in this community, it's somewhere I wanted to go. If I lived outside the 277 loop, let's go hang out downtown at 2nd Ward. It became something more than just residential towers, and that's their private space. It became a true public space. And so we had public input. We met with people. Again, through the 2nd Ward input, we heard a lot of things, and especially about the history. People are saying, I had no idea we had such a rich history in this part of Uptown Charlotte. We need to hear about that. We need to know about that. So you see the historic elements and key locations. The gym was mentioned again, tying all this stuff together. And again, this is straight out of the 2nd Ward master plan. And so we just started highlighting, saying, all right, the gymnasium was important. Someone mentioned neighborhood gateways. When you come into Uptown, you've arrived somewhere. Public art, street markers, street grid was important. And again, Brooklyn Village, or Brooklyn has some sort of identity. So this is where we started. If you remember from the master plan, we started with a Commons Park area. This was what the focus area was. So if you're looking, there's my marker again. 3rd Street is to the north. Here's McDowell. We are just across the street over here at the Blake Hotel. This is Martin Luther King Boulevard, and Stonewall's just off the page. What we introduced were apartments with active ground floor uses, condominiums, and office with underground parking. This little thing in the middle here you see is an elevator that takes you down to the underground parking. If you go out there, there is a lot of topography. And that's one thing we were challenged with this site was how do you address the parking? We want the urban framework. We want these great streets to happen. How do you make up that much grade? So one thing we did is we started tucking parking underground so that you can really address both streets. All of our streets are public streets. They're not private. They're not intended to be something a bit more atypical. But this was one of the first projects that really looked at the urban street design guidelines from the city of Charlotte. So again, condominiums, office, you've got condos here with a wrap deck component. This is the MAC, the Aquatic Center, and we talked about the Second Ward Gymnasium, but really this park and creating a great edge to that park and making it something. So we'll look at it quickly what it is. So the north side here, we were adding a carousel. We had a interactive water feature, something where kids can just get out there and splash and play and be kids. You know, it's something that the city needs downtown. The next area we'll look at is what we call the Great Lawn Space, the lawn event space, somewhere concerts could happen. Pops in the park, some sort of small little symphony thing happening. The other cool thing is we have this piazza, and it says / ice skating. We were designing it so that in the wintertime, it could be flooded with about 3 inches of water and turned into an ice skating rink. So active all throughout the year was vitally important to this development. And again, a rendering of what that might look like. Again, activation of the ground floor plane was so important for this project. To the south of that, just above Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, we have a sculpture garden. Charlotte has some great artists in it, especially in the NODOC community, the Plaza Midwood community, bringing those artists downtown and celebrating it. And the blanket lawn, again, was just a space for people to hang out and enjoy the space. To the south of Martin Luther King, you'll see this reflection pond and assembly space, a space where people can just gather. One thing about Marshall Park is if there's ever some sort of protest or something going on, they go to Marshall Park because it's just a big wide open place and you chase the geese away and it's yours. But this became a place for people to gather. So if there was, I guess, Occupy Charlotte going on, this is where the tents would be today. And then down to the very south end, again, we talked about the Second Ward Gymnasium. We thought it was important to have a space for active recreation. A lot of this stuff before now has been talked about passive recreation. Great space to throw out the blanket, a great place to sit and reflect. This was a space to get out there and throw a Frisbee, walk your dogs, something where you can get outside and be active with your friends. And then lastly, to the north, 3rd Street, great linear park. We needed something to really break down the scale of all the government center buildings across the street. One of the challenges we had from a pedestrian standpoint, how do you get the government stuff on the north side of 3rd Street? If you go down that street and look at it, it's just a big bunch of blank facades, right? And there's very limited pedestrian connections. How do we connect to that? How do we relate to that? Or do we even try to relate to that? So we brought the Martin Luther King Jr. sculpture front and center, really creating, right now it's just kind of tucked away, really doing something with that. And then this is the final slide. This was the rendering. This was what was supposed to be envisioned as part of the first phase of Brooklyn Village. So that's it.